Hey, Garret Price back again, and today we are talking about the top running back prospects in the 2022 NFL Draft. All right, so before we actually get into the nitty-gritty, originally I was going to do top 5, and I still am going to do my top 5, but as I went to go do that, I realized that 8 all the way up to 3 are all crazy close for me. So it felt a little unfair to be like, oh yeah, here's a top 5, but yet really the guys at 6, 7, and 8 are all basically in the same spot. So I figured it would be better to talk about some of my honorable mentions that are really just decimal points away in my nerd score right now. So the 3 guys that just missed the cut, at 8 right now, I have Rachaad White. At 7, I have Dameon Pierce. And at 6, I have Tyler Beatty. All 3 of these guys I like for different reasons. All of them showed well at the Senior Bowl. I'm going to be talking about all 3 of these players at length later. Today's not that day, but I just wanted to make sure you knew that all 3 of those guys are basically just hairs away from being inside of my top 5. At number 5, it's probably my hottest take of all of these compared to what I'm seeing in consensus. The guy I'm going to be talking about here, Zamir White. Zamir White was the top dog, the alpha in his class coming out. He was the number 1 running back prospect. Problem is, he tore his ACL his senior year. Then he tore his ACL in his other leg as a true freshman at Georgia. So he didn't even get moving until his sophomore campaign. However, he showed signs, showed flashes. Then his junior year, he became the lead dog and looked really good over these past 2 seasons. What really stands out to me is he is a complete running back. He's great between the tackles. He's got great feel, awesome vision, explosiveness. Like, he has the whole package, but none of these things are quite elite. And I think that's the thing that's missing and why people don't love him as much as other people, like maybe myself. But I think he's very well-rounded in that you can run him right between the tackles. He's going to find a seam, and he's going to carry some defenders for a couple extra yards. He's got enough wiggle in his game and enough long speed to break some long ones every now and then as well. One of the things I found very interesting about Zamir White, there have only been 4 players so far under Kirby Smart who started in, it was either 2015 or 2016, at Georgia. There's only been 4 players to rush for a total of 2,000 yards or more at Georgia. Those players so far have been Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, DeAndre Swift, and Zamir White. So Zamir White is in very good company. At number 4, I'm looking at Kyren Williams out of Notre Dame. Now, if you were to add maybe an inch or 2 and 20 pounds to this guy, we're talking about the top running back in the class, right up there with who my number 1 guy will be. We'll talk about him a little bit, but they would be neck and neck right there. The problem is he's not. He's a little bit undersized, and he's not this elite athlete like you would like to see a little bit of an undersized guy be, but he does a lot of things really well, just like I mentioned with Zamir White. But there's a couple things even particular to his game that I think are special. I think he's very good as a pass-catching option. Yes, he did have a few drops here and there, but he's great in and out of his cuts in his routes. He can be flexed out. I think he's going to be great at that. But also, he's great in pass protection. Anytime that you can combine a player that is good in the receiving game and good in pass protection, that's going to be very, very valuable for an NFL team. So even though I think he's going to be used in more of probably a third down capacity at the next level, I think he's going to be very valuable and he's going to be good for fantasy football teams. A lot of people mention Austin Eckler as a comp. Even though I think Eckler's a little bit more of a freak athletically, I think Kyren Williams could fall into a similar role and maybe get a few more touches between the tackles than we're originally expecting. At number 3, we have Kenneth Walker. Walker is a guy that was at Wake Forest for most of his career. He had some up and down seasons, but nothing ever to write home about. Never got a ton of touches. And so he ends up transferring to Michigan State, and he absolutely blew up. He had over 1,600 yards this past season and was actually in the running to be part of the Heisman equation up until the last 2 games of the season, specifically when he got beat up during the Ohio State game. But he definitely elevated his draft stock by a ton. We're talking about probably the shiftiest player in this class. This guy is one of those players that could make people miss in a phone booth. His feet are very quick, very choppy. I really like what I see. Hasn't been used a lot in the passing game, so that is something that is going to have to be evaluated at the next level. Is it just something that wasn't used, or is it something that he can't do? I think it's more just something that wasn't used often, but I think he'll be just fine in that in the next level. Needs to clean up some pass protection. Not the strongest runner physically, but he does enough there. I have no issues with him between the tackles whatsoever. I think he's going to be just fine. He's a poor man Shady McCoy is really what I see. I don't think he's going to be obviously as good as him. That's why I said he's a poor man's Shady McCoy, but I think we're talking about a similar archetype there for a guy like Kenneth Walker. Number 2 on my list, and this is kind of where we elevate a tier. I think, honestly, it really is all those other guys that I talked about are in a tier. And then number 2, Isaiah Spiller is in his own tier. And then we'll talk about my guy in the top tier. But Isaiah Spiller out of Texas A&M, he's a very prototypical size back. We'll see what he comes in at when he goes to the combine. He's a junior, so we don't have his measurables just yet. But we're probably looking at somewhere around 6 foot tall, 215. So we're looking at a very well-built running back. And yes, before you ask, there is some sort of like distant cousin type thing to CJ Spiller, but they're not the same type of player at all. Even though they both have great feet, Isaiah Spiller is a much more physical back, has a lot more size than we saw out of a guy like CJ Spiller. But I think he's going to be one of the top 2 backs in this class. I think he's one of the few that actually have an opportunity to maybe get second round draft capital. And there's some teams that could really use a guy with his size. And I think he's a slightly above average athlete too. We'll see when it comes to testing. I don't think he's going to top out on the 40, but I think some of the other drills he's going to do very well because he's got such good feet. He's got that good acceleration, and he can make some people miss. And if he needs to, he'll run you over as well. So I really like Isaiah Spiller. He was used as a true freshman at A&M, but these past 2 seasons, over 1,000 yards in both seasons, used enough in the receiving game. I don't think it's necessarily his strongest point, but it's something he can use. He can catch the football. He can do things out of the backfield that way. So even though I don't necessarily fully project him as a 3-down back, it wouldn't shock me in the least if there's a team that falls in love with him and uses him in that capacity. Now we get to our last guy, Bresean Hall. Bresean Hall out of Iowa State. And basically, David Montgomery stepped out the door, and Bresean Hall just stepped right in. Broke a record this year for most consecutive games while scoring a touchdown. Had nearly 1,000 yards as a freshman. And over the past 2 seasons, over 1,500 yards and over 1,400 yards in back-to-back seasons. Over 20 touchdowns in both seasons. Used as a 3-down back. Can catch the football beautifully. But watching Bresean Hall play is like a work of art. Originally, honestly, I didn't appreciate him as much. I had him around my 3rd or 4th running back coming into the process, and it was based mostly just on highlights and things like that. But it wasn't until I really watched the All-22 tape that I appreciated how talented Bresean Hall is. Bresean Hall has far and away the best vision in this class, and I think that's something that we cannot emphasize the most, because that is arguably the most important thing for a running back, is to have good vision and feel in the hole, and he absolutely has that. He's always making the correct choice. He makes those quick moves. He's got very good feet, but boy, does he have some power as well. The patience is there. There are no real holes in his game. If you wanted to poke one, he's not the home run threat. He's not the guy that's going to be running for 90-yard touchdowns at the NFL level. He had some long runs in college, don't get me wrong, but he's not going to come in and run a 4.4. He's probably going to be in the mid to low 4.5s. And that's plenty fast enough at the running back position. But this is a guy that it will be breaking off chunk play after chunk play after chunk play at the next level. 20 yards, 12 yards, 33 yards, 15 yards. Like, you're going to see a lot of those over and over and over. And those build up really quickly. Like I mentioned, good hands. I think he is far and away the top running back in the 2022 class. If you have any questions on this, feel free to put your questions and comments below. If you think I missed somebody that should be in the top 5, I can already think of a couple names that I might be seeing in the comments. Please put them below. I'll be more than happy to answer any of those questions.